Hey guys, welcome. This is episode 2 of the Behes Podcast. Last time we discussed fake news, propaganda, a work by Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, Camus' The Plague, and also Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. This time also we have some cool stuff to talk to you guys about, parts of the reading list that we added to the reading list and are passionate about. So here we go. I'd like to begin by introducing all the people I have with me right here. The first is two-time Mahabehes champion, Mr. Shubhankar Kashyap.
Hello.
Next up, we have Navneel, who has dropped his last name. And he is, of course, your outreach coordinator, blah, blah, blah. Everyone knows who Navneel is. Next up, we have Ms. Muskan Bansal, who is part of our tournaments team, has taken charge of more rounds than any of us this season, and is the whole and soul of our tournaments team. And right here, of course, is chief trainer, sorry, coronavirus, no touch. Nemish Tripathi, who is one of our head trainers at Counterpoint Edu Labs. And of course, you would have seen him at various tournaments before. So yeah, that's it. We'll jump straight into it. This year's reading list was The Power of Yes. I'll just start by talking a little bit about what that is, what that means. Basically, uh, if we have this bottle right here, when we were just born, when we saw a bottle, we didn't recognize what this is for. My mother saw this and said bottle. My dad saw this and said bottle. So I created the knowledge that this is a bottle. Just like that, as individuals, we do this every day, and sometimes as groups, we do this every day. So, for example, if you walk into um, a room and you hold this up and you say, "This is not a jewelry box. This is a gunpowder box," and everyone in the room looks and says, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's where we store the gunpowder." A newcomer to that room would assume safely that that's a gunpowder box. So that's what the power of yes is all about. It starts at the individual level. First, you answer the question, is it a yes yourself? And then after that, as society and civilization, we do the same thing. So we'll start by at the individual level, which is what part one of the reading list is all about. From the first most important thing, the fight, flight, freeze reaction. So Muskan, you want to tell us about your research about that?
Fight, flight, and freeze reaction is a response to a acute threat of survival that is marked by physical changes and that prepares a human or an animal to either react, retreat, or freeze at the current situation. So the functions of this response were first described in around 1900s by American neurologist and physiologist Walter Bradford Cannon. So now what happens is, as soon as a body senses danger, it automatically goes into the survival mode, and even before the mind can figure out whether the threat is actual threat or not, our body reacts to it. This reaction takes place directly through the control of our nervous system, more specifically parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Now, sympathetic nervous system is responsible for all the changes that take place in our body during this response, and parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for bringing the body back to the homeostasis. That is the normal state that the body was in previously the reaction was started. Now, very quickly to describe what actually happens when this response is taking place. The initial response begins in hypothalamus in our brains, which activates the pituitary gland, which then secretes ACTH. After that, simultaneously, adrenal gland is being activated by the nervous system, which secretes adrenaline, which then results into the secretion of cortisol, that is our stress hormone, which results in high BP, high blood pressure, and suppressed immune system. So all of this is done in an effort to create a boost of energy and preparation of our muscles and body for the response that we might have to give if the threat is real. Now, a lot of physical changes take place when this response is taking place. So like I said, a lot of energy is being created. So for that, acceleration of heart and lung activity happens. Due to the acceleration of heart and lung activity, there's increased flow of blood, there's high BP, high heart rate, high blood sugars, and high fat, so that more and more energy can be created in our body. When all this energy is created, both energy and blood is being transferred and diverted from the less important parts of our body at that time to the more important parts, that are basically the brain and the muscles, which are more required for the response. Now, three things happen because of that. A is metabolic energy resources are liberated and blood vessels connected to the muscles are dilated, so that again more and more blood can be transferred to those areas. Second, paling and flushing of skin happens. Now, paling happens on the areas from where the blood is being diverted from, and flushing happens to the areas where the blood is being diverted to. So you notice that your palm will pale, whereas the muscles, like your face, will start paling and flushing alternatively, because flushing happens because a lot of blood is being transferred to the brain. Paling happens because a lot of blood is being diverted from the cheek muscles. So that happens. Next thing that happens is the inhibition of stomach and upper intestinal activity, which eventually leads to slowing or stopping of digestion, which also releases our bladder, due to which we urgently feel the need to pee. Because again, the energy and the blood is being diverted from our digestive
So,
system to
so
the
it's scientific when I say कि मैं तो इतना डर गया that I felt the need to urinate. That's biological.
yeah,
Learn
that's why.
something.
Other interesting changes that happen are constriction of blood vessels throughout the body. This happens so that in case there's an injury, there's not much loss of blood from our body. Next, very important thing that happens is our loss of peripheral vision. Like we normally have a peripheral vision, we lose that when this response is taking place, and we have tunnel vision, so that we can focus on the current situation, and our pupil gets dilated so that more and more light can enter our eyes. Next thing that happens is auditory exclusion. Next, very prominent and easily visible thing that happens is a shaking of hands and legs. Yeah, that exactly, Navneet. Okay, that happens because there is a lot of muscle tension in our muscles, so that our body can be provided with extra speed and strength. So because of that muscle tension, increased energy, increased blood flow, our hands and legs start to shake. Now, for the most important change and the most interesting change that happens is that our mind starts to focus on all the negative things that have happened to us in the past, so that it can scan all of these things and come up with best possible solution to the current situation. Like when I read that, I could easily, like, the things that have happened to me in past start to make sense, because if there's a situation which is very dangerous to me according to that point of time, my mind literally starts to bring back all those negative memories, and now it makes sense why that happens.
Yeah, and
Next,
probably that's how phobias also work. That
yeah,
if I was peeling peas and a caterpillar came out, then I would not be able to eat peas for a long time because, yeah,
yeah, yeah. I will talk about phobias in some time.
sure.
Also, when all of this is taking place, we uh, we very often feel chest pain, and we feel that we might faint. That fainting thing happens because there's a lot of oxygen in our body at that time, and there's a very little carbon dioxide. So due to which we feel a little dizzy and we feel that we might faint. But actually it cannot happen, because faintness happens when there's low blood pressure. But during this time, our blood pressure is actually high than the normal rate. Also, when there's increased heart and lung activity, we feel the chest pain, which a lot of people think is a symptom of heart attack, but again, it is not, and it can easily be relieved by breathing exercises. So that is that. Now, this response has both negatives and positives. Talking about the positives first, this is a self-defense mechanism of our body that prepares our body to respond to any small threat or a life-threatening situation. It also helps our body in day-to-day activities to work under pressure. It prepares our mind to function properly and rationally in the situations where there's extreme pressure. For example, if we have a very important presentation to give, this response comes in handy at those situations, because it it makes our brain think rationally even under pressure. Now, coming to negatives, talking about phobias, we'll talk it here. Body a lot of time misinterprets safe situations to be dangerous situations, and this response takes place at those situations as well. So, phobias is an example of that. For example, if I am phobic to dark places, even if the place is safe, my mind will tell me that it is not safe, and I will enter into a survival mode. So now, in this situation, two things can happen. If a person has a stable mental health, the person's mind, when it will tell the person that the situation is safe, the person's parasympathetic nervous system will easily be able to bring the body back to the normal state. But for a person who does not have a stable mental health, the brain cannot properly convince the body that the situation is safe, and the parasympathetic nervous system cannot work properly, which will turn this response into a panic attack.
Okay.
Now, in the panic attack situations, again, two things. We can try to control whatever is happening in our body ourselves, and if it is very extreme, we might need medical help. For controlling it ourselves, we should close our eyes so that the peripheral vision and that tunnel thing and the focus is diverted. And we should start practicing deep breathing. That will normalize our heart rate, our blood pressure, and everything else, which will slowly and steadily bring back our body to normal.
Okay, so Muskan, what you
Yeah.
mean to say is when a cockroach is cornered up, then the cockroach will unfold its wings and it will try to fly.
Yeah.
So that situation is the same situation when compared to something like there's this phobia of seeing a lot of holes at the same place for humans. So the if you see a lot of holes at the same place, you start getting heart palpitations and things like that. So we are in the same situation as to the cockroach.
Yeah.
The difference is that we're just not going to we're not in a, like you said, this is not a do or die situation, but still we will experience all the bodily things that you just talked about. I think
Exactly.
that would be very interesting to
Yeah.
it would be very interesting to know how animals would respond to phobias if they have even any kind of phobia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can't survive nuclear attacks, and we can't even fly as much as
Yeah,
a cockroach.
that's a bit.
That was pretty much about how flight and fight reaction is. That I found it very interesting to know how our body
Yeah,
works.
yeah, yeah. And it's like it's a gift to humans. Like if you
Yeah.
think about what are the things that make us human, they are the things that have been passed on to us over centuries and much longer time periods than that. For
Right.
example, this is kind of related to fear and the way the fight and flight reaction. You guys ever get goosebumps while watching a movie or something? So do you know why goosebumps happen? Goosebumps happen because long, long ago we all were like we had more hair. Homo sapiens have become less hairy. I can do this because I am very less hairy. Homo sapiens are actually very less hairy than they used to be before. So at that time, whenever you felt fear or a reaction to something that is scary or could be troublesome to you, your hair used to stand up on end of the goosebumps. So you looked bigger, like a bear. You make yourself bigger in front of a bear and stuff, right? That's how what you're supposed to do when you fight a bear. But that's why we get goosebumps basically. So the fight flight freeze reaction is just a gift given to us to deal with stressful situations. Of course there are negative byproducts of that, as Muskan just
It's
discussed.
like cats do. They raise their body hair whenever they're scared.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
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 yeah.
like in cartoons. Yeah,
No, in
Yeah.
real life also. There's one outside my building. Whenever Pearl comes, she goes,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, so is flight or flight reaction only a biological thing, or it has some metaphorical examples in political or social life?
I'm not sure about that, but yes, it does a lot. I think it somewhere influences our individual decision making
The
to some extent.
consequences could be what
Yeah.
Pranav
Collective.
is talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Social,
So that's
political, whatever.
how it is related to other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That.
mean, you can take some poetic license and stretch it like we did. Like you guys might remember, there was a motion in our first half of the online rounds that the lockdown was a flight reaction to the virus. So basically, in a case like that, you should know what a flight reaction is and then try and define it that way and work on it. But basically, what the fight, flight, freeze reaction is, because Muskan is the only one with some scientific background among us, is what Muskan just described. And it's very cool if you think about it in terms of history and anthropology that how we have gotten to this point. And also, as Nemish pointed out, every animal has some version of that at the end.
As you said, it has a lot to do with evolution, right? So evolutionary, what we found to be scary or what we found to be life threatening to us, we developed internal biological mechanisms against it so that we don't have to face that thing.
And I'm sure as after agriculture set in and after we started domesticating animals, a lot of that changed. And maybe the reactions we have now are very different from like thousands of years ago. So while we were talking about individual decision making and individual differences is a big deal in psychology. Some of you that are high schoolers studying psychology would already have heard of this. Its individual differences can be explained very simply through interests and aptitudes and also intelligence, which we'll talk about at the end, just because it's a very misunderstood term. We say, yaar, wo to bada intelligent hai. For anything, the person could, I don't know. Yeah. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So what I wanted to bring up was that one of the motions we put up was that our interest and aptitude are not necessarily great predictors of success. So that's one of the things that we have already studied, and we are telling you this because we'll probably retire it now. So yeah, that motion won't come up again, just in case you were wondering. But here's what it basically means. There are two very, very different things. For example, I could be very interested in playing football, being a footballer, but have absolutely no aptitude to doing that, which is, I believe, a very, very common problem. Yeah, everyone could probably relate to that at some level. So the question, and that's interest. Matlab, the things I pay attention to. I'll just take like a minute and explain attention really quickly. Attention is basically your mind is being bombarded with, sorry, Nemish, stimuli all the time, right? The stimuli are hitting you all the time. The things you that get through are the things you pay attention to, that you funnel through, that you put through the bottleneck, and you actually retain. For example, if I walk into a party or like a whatever gathering of people, and all of them are talking, like 600 people are talking, I can't make out anything. But if I'm talking and I hear my name from somewhere, someone saying, "Oh, that's Salil," I say Salil, and all my attention is suddenly zoned into, just like television, zoned into that person. And yeah, that's called the cocktail party phenomenon. So that's attention. The things that you pay attention to make up your interest or your variety field of interest. And aptitude is totally different. Aptitude is that if you are given just the right conditions, just the right circumstances, are you likely, do you have a predilection to do well at that? Do you have a tendency to be skilled at that, to be good at that? That's aptitude. So, for example, I could have a great memory. I could have a very compassionate and feeling heart. I could have a hand that just does not shake, like Dr. Asthana from Munnabai MBBS. I could have all of those things that make a good doctor. That would make me have a great aptitude to be a doctor. But if I have no interest in being a doctor, let's say I want to be a comedian, then there's a problem there. Okay, these two are very different things, and we just want to make that clear to you. I just very quickly like to talk about how you should not confuse aptitude and intelligence, because aptitude is your ability to do well at something. Intelligence has been interpreted in many ways. The most common way that we know of it when you hear the word IQ is that intelligence is a straight scale. Nemish is on the dumb side. No, I'm joking. Nemish, sorry. Intelligence is a straight scale, goes from, let's say, 0 to 200, although there's no theoretical upper limit, and nobody can have 0 IQ. Like a stone would have 0 IQ, maybe, and 100 is the average. So the 70% of the human population is between 85 and 115. This small gap holds 70% of the human population. 15% are above that, 15% are below that, roughly speaking. This is the average IQ, and that's how it runs. It's mental age divided by chronological age into 100. Basically, all the skills and all that, all the intellectual capacities you should have, uh, you should have had at that age. That's your mental age. Then there's chronological age into 100, and you get your IQ.
People have this idea that aptitude is rigid and aptitude is biological in nature, while it is inherent to us, and while we do have a specific window in which our aptitude can change, but our aptitude can be altered. Which means that, for example, you can also alter your IQ or improve your IQ to a certain limit, right? There are exercises that you can do to improve your IQ. So it's not fair for a lot of people to say that you don't have aptitude for it, because aptitude can be developed through a lot of practice, through a lot of exercises. However, there's also a limit to which it can develop. So yeah, I think it's really important that people realize that if you have real interest in something, you can develop, you can improve your aptitude in that skill. So yeah.
Another point just about the intelligence thing. Although we just talk about increasing your IQ, there are a lot of people that do not agree with this binary representation of IQ, and a lot of people talk about multiple. Like there's a psychologist called Howard Gardner who spoke about the multiple intelligence theory. So, for example, he says that there are different kinds of intelligence, like bodily, kinesthetic, spatial, visual. So just yeah, do your own research. Won't spoon feed you, but check that out. There's a lot of different ways to look into that. Okay, so this is very interesting. You guys might appreciate this. This was I'll tell you the name of the guy also. This guy called Dr. Ravi Ravindran, who's like an amazing counselor, and he believes that he should make every teacher teaching in the Indian system a counselor also. And yeah, that's kind of what his goal was at the time when I attended his session. And he performed an exercise where he told us that if I take an aptitude test, let's say just my mathematical and logical skills, my analytical skills, verbal, all these skills are going to be tested. Then when a child takes that test, their graph usually looks a little something like this. For example, if I plot them like this, my logical is here, my mathematical is here, my verbal is here, my interpersonal personal example is here, and something else is very high. So it looks like a mountain range, that whole graph. But after they do that with teachers and educators, their aptitude graph looks like a flat line, like the thing you see on the monitor when people die. I'm not saying that adulthood is where your intelligence goes to die, but when people in who are highly studied, like let's say somebody who's in academics only writes, so everyone there gets a verbal aptitude of about 5 or 4 to 6, or maybe much higher if they're especially brilliant. But everyone gets there at least, and all the other abilities go down to compensate for it, all the other aptitudes. So that's how you live your life can affect your aptitudes, and which is why when people say go and follow your passion, this is the kind of way that makes sense, like scientifically. So I thought that was very interesting that your profession determines everyone's aptitude levels become kind of similar after like 15 or 20 years into a career. Okay. So one of the next things that we want to discuss was actually a book that we'd add to the reading list, just in reference, which is Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath. So the concept of underdogs is something that we've been studying this season as part of the online rounds. You might already have seen a couple of motions. One was that our support for underdogs is not born out of genuine support, or that our support of underdogs is not, there's no intelligent reason to support underdogs. Basically, these are the kind of things we were discussing. But we're going to take this opportunity to take you a little deeper into the reading list. I'll start by telling the story a little bit. This is a biblical story. A lot of you are already aware of it. I'll try and give some context quickly. So I'm going to tell this story to you. Many years ago, in what was known as, in what is ancient Palestine, there was a war that took place, a face-off between the Israelites and the Philistines, who were North African people. So, just as a side note, the word Philistine, which is used for a person these days that does not appreciate good cinema or art or anything like that, that word comes from there, from those North African people. Whether that was a racist thing or not is something you should do your own research about. But yeah, probably was. So the Philistines were coming across, were entering into the Hebrew lands through the valley of Shephelah, and over there, which is actually a very beautiful place, um, all over. Like it's one of the most beautiful parts of India. But it was also traditionally where armies used to come through and try and cross the mountain range to try and get into Israel. So there was a face-off over here between the Israeli army and the Philistine army. Now, in older times, what used to happen was that it was called single combat to avoid the repercussions and the damages and the cost of a full-scale war. Two sides would very often decide to send their strongest warrior, their most able warrior, to fight each other, and the warrior that won that fight, his side would win the war, and that's how that happened. So in this battle, the Philistines sent down their strongest warrior, whose name, of course, was Goliath. Goliath. He was 6 foot 9 inches, which is pretty tall for someone from there at that time. And he walks down the mountain and he says, "Come to me, come to me." And he walks down. And from the other side, the Israeli army is standing, and King Saul, who was the king of the Israelites, looks around at his people, and nobody is willing to, because everybody knows they don't stand a chance fighting against this huge, able warrior who has a coat of armor and is huge and is walking down with an attendant who's carrying his javelin, which is what they spear people with. So King Saul looks around at his people, and only one person answers, who's a shepherd boy called David, and he just walks towards him with a sling, like a sling. So in ancient warfare, what used to happen was he had the different kinds of army men. First are heavy infantry, then you have cavalrymen, and then you have slingers, who are basically archers. So it's very important for you to understand that David walked down with a sling, not a gulail, but it's two pieces of rope attached to a leather pouch that he used to swing around like this. This is what a slinger would do, and release a projectile. Highly skilled people could hit birds in mid-air. We have already found this out through medieval tapestries and artworks, and from that time that this used to happen. So, if Goliath was a highly skilled slingsman, that person, when Goliath was walking down, Goliath expected an infantryman to fight him, expected arm to arm combat. And that is why he said, "Come to me." And the hints are right there. He says, "Come to me," because that's his biggest weakness. He's not fast, he cannot move very fast. Sure, he's big and strong and has a huge javelin, but he is no match for a projectile, a stone coming to his forehead at 35 meters per second, which is what people who are trying to recreate it think that would be the speed by which the rocket is forehead. Just to put that into context, that's 2 or 3 Shoaib Akhtar deliveries rolled into one. And that's how fast a stone hit his forehead. So the point is that there really was no chance. Anybody actually looking at that would have known that it is a story of Goliath walking down without thinking about the consequences, and this guy being obviously better and more skilled and killing them instantly. But rather, what it is taught today as, and in fact, you even use this term, like Juventus is a great Goliath of European football. People say that because it's like a huge giant. It looks like an overdog, if that's a word. But this is taught to us like an underdog story. Like, oh, David beat Goliath, how? Whereas it's really not about that at all. So I think this is very interesting. One, also another historical fact. It's very obvious. It's very obvious, not. It's possible, plausible, and people have given this theory that Goliath actually suffered from uh, disorders that made him that huge. So, like, he suffered from giantism, and that made him unable to move and probably slightly blind. So, in this battle, David won pretty easily. But the point that I'm trying to make is very often, like, why do we, looking at this story, think, oh, obviously at first listening that, wow, David won, the smaller guy won. Because we see some things as advantages that are not advantages, and we see some things as being weaknesses that are not weaknesses. And examples of this can be seen all over the world all the time. Can you guys think of any examples where an underdog victory that actually made sense but at the time seemed like one?
Sure. I mean, before I give an example for underdogs, I think it's very interesting to note this idea of perceived difficulties. Whereas, wherein people have told us that if in a warfare you are with a person who's huge, who's tall, and who's like a giant, who's basically like Goliath, then you're bound to lose. Whereas, when we provide an unconventional lens to a story, or like a new lens to any warfare, then we might be able to look at perspectives that we never thought of before. So, for example, Johan Cruyff, like the Dutch footballer, he didn't have a huge football fields to play in. Like when he was young, he used to play concrete football. So, like he used to play in colonies, and when in colonies you play, like if you played in colonies, then football used to reflect a lot. It's like I'm forgetting the term, but deflect. Yeah, the football used to deflect a lot, which is why your reflexes had to be really, really strong and really accurate in order to track the ball, which really helped him develop his reflexes and all of those stuff when he played the real matches. So it's like perceived difficulties, things that we feel are difficult right now can really help us in future in other skills. And to give the example of an underdog, for example, if you look at how in Vietnam War, normal Vietnamese farmers thrashed US Army on their own turf tells you how easy it is for underdogs to win. How easy it is for us to go ahead and take the victory if we look from an unconventional lens, if we look through everything from a very fresh perspective. So yeah.
You spoke about the Vietnam War. I know that we'll probably bring up the Bay of Pigs incident later, and we'll relook this again. Another example is, I don't know if you guys have seen this movie or read this book, the book called Moneyball. Um, I'm forgetting who saw the movie recently.
I did.
You did.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the name of the team? The Oakland A's.
Oakland Aces, something like that.
Yeah. And what's the name of the coach, the original coach?
I don't remember.
Let's just call him Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt plays the part of the coach.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
We'll call him Brad Pitt for the purpose of this discussion. So Brad Pitt became the manager of a team that wasn't exactly doing very well, wasn't qualifying for the playoffs or anything like that. And obviously, when you select a team, like in India, we had this for a very long time, that the biggest stars will play, right?
Yeah.
So rather than choosing well-established stars in a team, or going for experience, what he based his entire team selection on, everything is nothing except statistics. So, for example, to use a cricket analogy, if I have to decide a team, I will put you, even if let's say you are not the most accomplished or experienced batsman, I'll put you in at number 9 because you have the highest strike rate at number 9, and we need a high strike rate probably to win this match. So I could be sitting next to Sachin Tendulkar, but if Ashish Nehra has a better strike rate at number 9, which he does not, just to be clear, then I would play that person.
Yeah.
And so just basing the whole thing on a meticulous study of statistics, he made it qualified for the playoffs or won the championship or whatever. I haven't seen the movie lately, but achieved a great victory with a underdog, seemingly underdog team, because he was using techniques that nobody actually knew about. So anybody who knew what the world and technology and data and sports would become from now, if we went back if we time travel, we'd be like, oh yeah, of course you are doing the thing that makes people win. But at that point they had no idea, so it looked like an underdog story. Yeah. So just questioning our understanding of who an underdog is in a situation is.
I recall a story. It's from Bagpat, UP, Uttar Pradesh. So there are these 80-year-old women who are called shooter dadi. So they started shooting at the age of 60. And when they started it, all of so they are in village, in a small village near Bagpur. So everyone was like, this is so bad. A, it goes against that women are going out and playing a sport. Second, it is like, at this age, how can you think of starting a new career, think of doing something new? But those two women, and if you see the gun, they weigh 2 kgs, the gun that they used to shoot in the games. Now, but these two women could do it, accomplish it, because they were all house makers, and everything from like milking the cow to making butter, everything they used to do from their hands. So their hand at the age of 60 were too strong that they could easily pick up the gun, and they play internationally. Anurag Kashyap made a film on them last year.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
called
yeah.
Sank Yak.
It's
So Chandra Tomar and
San Kiak, yes, that's what the
yeah,
movie is called.
so these are Tomar Dadis, and the whole village is now famous on their name, like Shooter
Yeah.
Dadis. So I think that's one thing where we sometimes see something as non-accomplishable, but people have their own skills to do that.
Yeah. Also, like I think there are many times when you look at an underdog story, obviously people are attracted towards an underdog story because you can relate to it. But I think more importantly, also drawing from references related to Moneyball, the movie, and the actual thing that happened. So it wasn't like you don't really need to be very associated or feel very like uh, feel a certain adoration for the characters who are underdogs, because they could be just about anyone, like in the movie and also in real life. What Oakland Aces, or whatever the name of the real team was, I don't really know that. What they did was they were constantly changing players. So they were constantly eliminating players and adding on new players depending on what kind of a game that was, depending on what kind of a setup they needed, depending on what kind of a phase they were in the tournament. In the same way, like you explained about the shooter Dadi thing, I am pretty sure there must have been certain conditions and certain circumstances which made them go all the way wherever they wherever they are at this point of time, everything that they've achieved. So just because anyone could have done that, that's also why it is so attractive, and like
Exactly.
everybody thinks about that, and everybody likes to hear that kind of a story or watch that kind of a movie.
Because we all want to think that we can also be the hero
Yeah,
at some point.
exactly. But the reality is that this is all just
Yeah.
simply mathematical.
Yeah.
As long as we're talking about teams and such, yeah, it's
Hmm.
simply mathematical. Like this also reminds me of guerrilla warfare and how about the whole Cuban uprising thing, and
Yeah.
but again, this is what I don't know. I have not. There must be people who have meticulously studied everything which happened sequentially, chronologically, in order to lead up to what they did. But since you haven't studied all of that, since you don't know the particulars and how the actual strategy was developed and how actual people were deployed and they did actual things, you just keep romanticizing about this idea that you don't really need to be good enough to do something. You just have to feel it. You just have to.
Yeah. I'll give you another example of that. The Haitian Revolution, first independent slave rebellion in the world, first independent black nation. Um, we when we hear all this, we are like, wow, people fought for their rights and all that. But do you know what actually made like their rebellion successful and what made France leave Haiti? It was the bubonic plague. So disease had threatened France's numbers and armies so much that it made more sense for them to leave completely than to do anything else. And suddenly Haiti was the first independent slave this thing in the world. Sure, there were people who fought for attendance, but it was largely to do with that. One more final example. I don't remember if it was Mozart or Beethoven. The story is that this composer, his father used to drink a lot and beat him every night, and yeah, basically make him play for his friends after drinking with them and make him play for hours. And he became, because of all the pain and suffering that he suffered, he became a great composer. and expressed it through music. But the truth is that that kid played more hours of piano than most other kids in that
Yeah.
age group,
Yeah.
and thus put in 3 to 4 thousand hours of piano playing, so that by the age of 12 or 13 they were that good that they were performing concerts in front
Yeah.
of thousands of people and stuff like that. So how we romanticize it, and especially those of us with a romantic lens of viewing not just life but history, will always make wrong assumptions about things, especially when it comes to things like who's the underdog.
Yeah.
And especially to add on to that, there's this phrase that people all like really like to use, which is despite all odds. It's like despite all odds, you have achieved this. And I think a lot of them don't actually analyze the odds because as Namish talks about guerrilla warfare used by Vietnamese farmers, they were very, very high skilled in terms of when they have to attack, where they have to attack, or and who they have to attack. So it's not as if that they did not have military tactics, but they had different military tactics. And that's what this whole discussion is about. It's not about having one kind of intelligence or one kind of skills. It's about having different kind of skills that can affect your result.
I'd just like to point out that Shubhankar has a painting of himself on the wall. That just like General Aladdin. So I don't know. If Shubhankar becomes a serial killer, you heard it here first. If he decides to take over the country, we told you first.
What if like serial killers start thinking this way? So this
This
guy in the 60s killed 20 people and you know he came from the slums. I could probably do 100 or something like that, but in a century. So yeah, I don't know.
He was a two-time Behes champion, and rather than going towards the successful future like others like him, he decided to go off the beaten track. He decided to murder thousands of. Okay, the next part of this discussion is going to be once again about two literature selections. The first one, of course, is The Emperor's New Clothes. And that was, of course, recommended and added to the reading list by Mr. Shubhankar Kashyap. So, Shubhankar, take it away. Tell us about it.
Sure. So Emperor's New Clothes is a very widely known folk tale, and it was like first written by this person called Hans Andersen. So this folktale basically talks about a very pompous, very arrogant emperor. And this emperor believed that he was the best in the world, that he was the smartest, that there was nobody who was in the entire world who was like him, who was as charming as him. So once, with all his arrogance, he asked like everyone in his kingdom to make the best pair of clothing, to make the best fabric that they've ever seen, something that he could wear and something that would glamorize everyone, something that would charm everyone. So that attracted a lot of interest from these two con people who really wanted to prove to the king that he wasn't as smart as he thinks he is. So he went to so both of these people went to him and they said, you know what, we have the best clothing parallel that you have ever seen. And the king was fascinated. King was like, oh my god, please show me. And then they just waved their hands blankly in the air and they said, oh, this is the clothing there is. To which, of course, as any rational human being, King was surprised. But because King was so arrogant, because King believed that he was the smartest person alive, he didn't say anything about it. He ironically said, oh my god, that's so good. Like, that's one of the best clothing I've ever seen, even when there was nothing, entirely like nothing there. It was just like air. So, and of course, those con people were able to sell him because of his arrogance and because of his perceived intellect. Now, this king, in order to show how smart he is and in order to show how glamorous he is, decided to march on in the kingdom, in the streets, and he's and he basically went in front of the public, wearing nothing, like being absolutely naked, walking in front of the public and going, "Oh my God, see my clothes! I am the best king there is." People were astonished, but even those people didn't want it to point it out to the king because who wants to tell the king that they have made a mistake? Everybody is afraid of the king. Everybody is afraid of the authority, which is why a little tiny boy who's seeing the king march naked goes ahead and says to his father, "Dad, isn't why isn't the king wearing anything?" And that's how the story ends. And the dad says, "You just can't see it." So that's how the story ends. It's like rationality gets compromised when you have people in power, and when those people in power believe in something and you can't challenge it. And this is an effect which is also a psychological effect which is called groupthink.
Yeah. And that's kind of why this story is connected to so many different things in your curriculum, which is like fake news. If 10 people share a news in your friend list, then you think that, oh, this news is true because 10 people have said it. It's also related to manufacturing consent, in that if everyone agrees that this invisible thing is the most beautiful suit ever made, then it just becomes the truth if everyone decides to agree to it. Like in the last one, we talked about the plague, right? Where the janitor is surrounded by dead rats, and he's just like, I don't see any rats. There are no rats here. That's exactly how all of this works. So yeah, I thought that was what was very, very interesting about this story.
Exactly.
Uh, yeah. Hmm?
In groupthink, you don't care about whether the decision is good or not, whether the result is beneficial or not. What you think about is whether you have consensus or not, which means whether you have everyone in agreement or not. Which is why on social media, if you see a lot of people sharing something, you also share it without really going ahead and researching about that topic, because you believe all of these people are sharing it, it must be true. So this is a logical fallacy that you must be aware of at all times. And to give a real world example about the same, coming linking it back to Vietnam War, John F. Kennedy and his cabinet hugely underestimated the prowess of Vietnamese farmers during the war. They were like, this is like any other ordinary nation. We have a lot of military, we have a lot of guns, we are definitely going to win this. But they didn't realize how smart those Vietnamese farmers were, how they were able to attack in stealth. And the same thing also happened to Kennedy during Bay of Pigs invasion, in which basically Kennedy decided to overthrow Castro by attacking him through like his port, attacking him through Cuba's fort. He went ahead and sent his army. Apparently, Castro got to know, and the army got humiliated. Like they, like they did. I don't think they killed a lot of people, but like they had to revert back to United States. Like the whole U.S. army was humiliated, and everybody knew this was going to happen if something like going ahead and intervening in another country's port, as US did, happens. But nobody said that to Kennedy during the decision. Why? Because nobody wanted to oppose Kennedy. Because nobody wanted to be the person who goes ahead and says, you know what, I don't like the idea. So when in a discussion your goal is consensus, then you go ahead and repress different idea. You repress challenges to the authority.
That reminds me of one of the motions we have, that a country of yes men would run smoothly, just that kind of thing. So yeah, there that's exactly how that works, and we don't, and it's related to the Vietnam War and stuff like that also. So the final literature selection that we'd like to bring up, I guess, is Agha Shahid Ali's Ghazal. Nemish, you want to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So there's this poem by Agha Shahid Ali, which is called Ghazal. The name of the poem is Ghazal. So in this, before coming straight forward to the poem, I'd like to tell you a little about what Ghazal actually is and what it used to be. So the idea of Ghazal started in around 7th century in Arabia, in that region, and it wasn't really called Ghazal. They were qasidas, which people used to recite. So qasidas were like, okay, so a ghazal is like a couple, 10 couplets or 15 couplets, which is like a combination of two sentences, two rhyming lines with one refrain. So the refrain is something on which we are like wawa and adab or whatever. So yeah, that is a refrain in a ghazal, and all these sentences which lead up to that refrain are called couplets. So in a ghazal there are 10 to 15, a maximum of 15 couplets. It's not a rule, but that's how they usually are. However, in qasidas, when it originally started before 7th, like during 7th century Arabia, Qasidas were like 100 or 200 couplets, which were all about the proclamation of war and about bravery of a certain clan and about the brave warriors that they've had and about people who had so much integrity and heritage that that they let all other people get motivated by it so that they could also go to war when the time comes. So like that sort of a thing. Like somebody stands up and they start pum, 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 and then they start with the whole kasida. Now in this kasida, the first couple lines sometimes were related to or you could say were drawing references from love and reverence and the whole emotion of love and how people are attracted to each other and also kind of romantic and sexual. But those were just the first couple of sentences or the first couple of couplets. After that, the whole kasida is about proclamation of war and letting everybody know how brave we are and that sort of a thing. So these were Kasidas. Now people slowly and steadily started to realize that you could make poems out of it. You could create beautiful things out of Kasidas, and you don't really need the whole Kasida. The rhyming and the couplet, the whole combination is such, and it is so flavorful that you don't really need the whole thing. And like it wasn't, I don't think it was a conscious decision, but slowly and steadily the Kasida went away, and we had Ghazal, our Ghazal. So, like it started from Arabia, but in the East, oh, you'd be surprised to know. I don't know if you'd be surprised or not, but yeah, just letting you know some trivia that I came across. There are ghazals spoken and heard in the places as far as Germany and Spain, which for me at least would have been the last place on earth to for me to imagine like ghazal offerings and whatever you call the whole community thing where ghazals are heard and sung.
Imagine going to a bar in Germany and listening to Jagjit Singh or Pankaj Udas.
Yeah, something like that. That's what I was also imagining. So yeah, there's this guy Federico Lorca, which you might be interested in, or you which might get interested in if you want to look him up. You could. He's a Spanish ghazal poet. Yeah, like also involved with ghazals. There's also Goethe influence in Germany from ghazals. So imagine this: if this is the world, if this is Arabia, this part is Arabia, then eastwards would be, I don't know, the camera must be showing you a mirror image. Then eastwards, it started spreading towards Persia, and westwards it started spreading towards Germany and Spain and a lot of other far-fetched European countries. So, and they've adopted ghazal in their own form. Like we wouldn't even know about a lot of uh, places who have adopted the style and they're doing it their own way now. So yeah, that's how they spread. And then from Persia, slowly and steadily, the ghazal trend started to come towards Southeast Asia. And by the 14th and 15th century, from the Islamic Sultanate and from all of and from Persia and everywhere, we started having major, like also Sufism was also one of the things which influenced ghazal. So since Sufism is so romantic and talks about love and peace and everything, so there was a lot of intermixing of cultures and things, and that's how ghazal got to India. So that's how we got ghazal. Now, this particular ghazal by Aga Shahid Ali is it talks about uh, a lot of things. Some of the major things are like being away from home. Okay, first of all, where is even home? So when you don't know where is home, then there are many times when uh, you start feeling distressed and you start having thoughts as to I need to find a home. I need to find my origin or my home. Uh, now, is there even any home? Could you pinpoint to it? and there is so many confusion in the whole surrounding the whole idea that Aga Shahid Ali thought that it would be nice to make a poem out of. So this guy was from Kashmir. He was born in 1949 in Kashmir. He has lived some part of his formative years of his life in Srinagar and in Delhi, so in India basically. So around in the 70s, in 76 or something, he moved to the United States, and then he taught in a lot of universities out there, and he was a staff for creative writing in many American universities, and he used to teach how to write poems and everything. In this poem, you'd see how he has uh, put forth his fear as to how there are many times when the leadership that we choose, does not really represent us, or even if it does represent us, you can't. There are not a lot of people who would think that it does represent us. So like there are lines from the poem that I don't have by heart, but yeah, some of them were on the lines of uh, okay. So the refrain in this poem was in real time. So the refrain is the in real time. So after every couplet, you will see in real time. So you'll know who the terrorists are and who the right people are when the country is polled in real time. Something to that effect was one of the lines.
Who's the terrorist and who the victim?
Yeah,
we
exactly.
will know when the country is polled.
Exactly. Who the terrorists are and who the victims are, we will know when the country is polled in real time.
So that's
This is one of the
obviously referring to the situation in Kashmir.
Yeah. That is obviously. Also, he has talked about being a refugee, and I will be a refugee of time in real time. I'm sorry, I'm a really bad poet. I don't remember it, but yeah, it's talked about being a refugee. So it obviously draws references from there because he never. Okay, so imagine this. This guy could never really feel that he was a citizen of a particular country while he was living in his own home. Then this guy leaves his own home to go to a place in his own country to study for higher studies, and then even then he doesn't really feel at home. Then from this country he goes abroad, and he's a first generation immigrant in some other country, in some first world country, and even then the feeling does not really leave him. It just cannot escape him. That thought bothers him again, now and again, even if it does not really have to do anything with his everyday life, or even if this kind of a thing does not have anything to do with our everyday lives. There are times when you would think, where did I even come from? Where did my ancestors belong from? I don't know. People like to find that out. This whole poem was all about it, and like I'll admit it, this I have read it very recently, and this was one of the most beautiful poems that I've ever read. So you should go and check this poem out. How you'd probably be interested in knowing how this poem exactly is related to the curriculum we have at hand this time of the year. So the some of the obvious things are in his poems he has been very reflective about how people at many times have full faith in the kind of leadership that they are choosing, and in the kind of representatives that they are choosing, and how these representatives betray them, abandon them at times, even when they have had full faith in them. So these are some of the feelings that he has dealt with in this poem. And yeah.
So once again, amazing poem. Also one of my favorite poems ever. When I read it for the first time. Also, do go check out Aga Shahid Ali's work. There's a lot of it that's up online on the internet for free on poetry.org and stuff. Okay, guys, thanks for joining. That was the second episode of the Behes Podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed. Please remember to leave in the comments below your suggestions for what parts of the reading list or what selections you want us to talk about next, so that we can pick that up in episode 3, which should be coming to you in about 10 days to 2 weeks. So we hope you enjoyed this. Please let us know in the comments so we can discuss stuff that you want us to. And from all of us here, from Behes and Counterpoint, goodbye. See you guys. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
And we have a special message from the two-time Mahabehes champion, Mr. Shubhankar Kashyap.
Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe.